Thank you for joining us today. My name is Lisa Ammon, and I serve as president of the Louisville Forum. We meet on the second Wednesday of every month at Vincenzo's Restaurant. The Louisville Forum is a nonpartisan public policies group founded in 1984. The Forum hosts debates and discussions of contemporary and sometimes controversial public policy issues that affect the greater Louisville community. Although we may take up issues that have a national interest, we try to highlight the local perspective. For more information on the Louisville Forum, our programs, or to make reservations, please visit our website at louisvilleforum.org. Today we are honored to have a guest moderator, Mark Hebert. Mark received his Bachelor of Arts in Mass Communications from Western Kentucky University. From 1987 to May 2009, Mark was a political and investigative reporter for WHAS-TV. In 2009, Mark became Director of Media Relations for the University of Louisville and is now Director of Programming and Production. Please welcome Mark Hebert.
Thank you, Lisa. Seems like old home week here. I see David Hopp and Steve Ford and some old diehard reporters and editors here, and Ed Statz from AP. So I feel like I'm among brethren here as we go forward for today. So this is the 3rd District Congressional Candidate Forum. I'm going to call it a forum. I don't like the term debate because they're not going to be going at each other head to head. So we're just going to call this a forum. I guess I need to go over the rules and what we're going to be doing this afternoon. First of all, we're going to have you all out of here by 1 o'clock. So that's the deal. We'll have a stopping point and get back to work. Each candidate will have up to 5 minutes for an opening statement and 2 minutes for a closing statement. Each candidate will have the opportunity to ask their opponent 2 questions. One of those questions will come near the start of the forum. The other will come in the middle, and the response will be no more than 90 seconds. And each question should be an actual question, not a statement. And if you keep on going, I'll cut you off. The candidates will also answer questions that all of you have submitted. Louisville Forum members will read the questions, and each candidate will have up to 90 seconds to answer. We'll have a timer sitting right here in the front table who will give the candidates a 30-second warning when they are speaking. Now, the moderator will not be shy about cutting off the candidates if they're going on too long. So, and folks who know me know I may just tell you to shut up, okay? I also have some discretion to give each candidate more time to answer a question that might deserve more than a 90-second answer. So if we get into something like Iran or something like that, and it needs more than 90 seconds, we'll go more than 90 seconds, and I'll give you a little bit of discretion. The moderator also has the discretion to ask follow-up questions in the highly unlikely, highly unusual, and improbable scenario that a candidate ducks a question or doesn't give a full answer. I don't expect that to happen here. So we had a coin flip before the lunch started, and Harold Bratcher will go first with his opening statement and also first with his closing. Harold Bratcher.
Good afternoon. I'd like to thank the Louisville Forum for hosting this event for us today between Congressman Yarmuth and myself. I'd also like to thank our esteemed moderator, Mark Hebert, and you people for coming out here to listen to us today. I'm Harold Bratcher. I'm a lifelong Louisvillian, a small business owner, a family man. What I'm not a politician, especially in comparison to my opponent, excuse me. In comparison to my opponent. What I am is a constitutional conservative Republican. Over the years, we have watched our public servants in Washington be more concerned about their personal agendas than the agendas of what I feel the people of this country. We have sat back and watched them make more nations more solvent than our own. And it's time that we, as the people, come together and start electing politicians that will stand up for us, the people. That's why I've chosen to put my name in this race today. The fact, I don't have any political experience. This is the first time I've ever ran for office. The closest political experience I have is when I helped my 2 kids run for class president. So that's my political experience. And, I think that's what the people of this 3rd district is looking for. They're looking for a candidate that is of the people. As I was growing up, I started with humble beginnings. I was raised by a mother of 4 children, single mother of 4 children, and we had to rely on public assistance from time to time. So I know what the people go through in this district. I haven't listened to their hardship stories. I have lived those stories myself. If I'm given the opportunity to go to Washington, I will have not only the story of my constituents, but I've also lived the same way they have, and I know what they need in Washington. As we come together today, we're here for one reason, to elect a representative. And we need a representative that is going to stand up for you, the people, and not a representative that's going to look out for their own personal interest. So what I'm asking you today is take a chance on me and give me the opportunity, because you'll never have a louder voice, a stronger fighter in Washington as I would be for you. Like I said, I'm not politically experienced, but I don't think experience is what gets us what we need in today's politics. I think this country is looking for a candidate that is a constituent, not a career politician. And again, thank you for letting me come here today on behalf of the Louisville Forum and you people of the Louisville Forum and the guests. I appreciate you listening to me, and hopefully we have a good debate between the congressman and myself. Thank you.
Harold Bratcher. Congressman John Yarmuth.
Well, thanks very much, Mark. Thanks for moderating today. Thanks to the Louisville Forum. As a former board member of the Forum, I cherish these events, not just those I get to participate in, but I always enjoyed the dialogue that occurs here and the intelligence of the audience, of course. And thanks to Harold for putting himself forward in this campaign. It isn't easy. It certainly isn't easy the first time you do it. So I congratulate him on that effort. That's what democracy is all about. You know, I've been in Congress now almost 10 years, and I must admit that the first 4 years were a lot more fun than the last 6. In the House of Representatives, it's a lot more fun being in the majority than in the minority. And when we were in the majority, we got a lot done. We actually worked to solve problems, and when we could, we did it with a few Republican votes, although we didn't have many. The last 6 years have been really frustrating. And they've been frustrating because what we've lost in Congress, if not in the country as a whole, is a governing mentality. Everything right now is an electoral mentality. It doesn't matter what the issue is. It doesn't matter whether it's education or immigration or healthcare. It's which team are you on? It's a UK U of L deal. And because the campaigns now never stop, the electoral mentality never turns off. And instead of saying on any particular issue, what's the best way we can come together to govern, it's how do I get an electoral advantage over the other side? And that, I think, has basically permeated society as a whole. Part of the reason is the issues we're dealing with are really complicated issues in Washington. Healthcare being the most complicated. But everything we deal with, immigration, education, energy, you name it, taxes, they're all very complicated issues. And I think what's happened is that the general public, which has other things to do rather than delve into the minutia of the Affordable Care Act, tends to default to their team. And we've got to figure out how to change the dialogue and how to engage the public in thinking about the issues and how they impact their lives. That's really what I've been trying to spend the last 10 years doing, but particularly the last 6. And as the lone voice on the other side of the philosophical spectrum from everybody else in the congressional delegation in Kentucky, it's an interesting challenge. But it's one that I relish, and it's one that I think is very, very important. But looking forward, I do believe that change is on the horizon, because I do believe the American people want to get off this red team, blue team competition and actually see some productivity in Washington. I know it can happen. I served as a member of the Gang of Eight back in 2013, working on immigration reform. 4 Democrats, 4 Republicans, negotiating every day for 7 months about how to come up with solutions to our immigration plan. And it was just like you would expect normal, rational people to deal with a complicated issue. We said, well, what if we do it this way? Well, if we do it that way, then we might lose this group and this group. Okay, well, how about if we do it this way? Yeah, I might be able to sell that. Just the way you would think, again, intelligent people would do it. The reason we were able to do it was because we did it in secret. No media, very little staff, and we didn't have to worry about if we took a step toward the other side, whether the entire media world on one side or the other would come down on us and whether we'd have a primary challenge or so forth. But we've got to figure out how to do that on a national level, because we can't do it. That's one of the reasons I look forward to another term in Washington, and very humbly ask for your support. Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman Yarmuth. Now, both candidates will stay seated in their seats, and the first thing we're going to do is, as I said, they each get to ask the other candidate a question. So right off the top, Congressman Yarmuth, do you have a question for Harold Bratcher?
I do. Mr. Bratcher, in your debate at KET during the Republican primary, you said that John Kasich was your first choice for nominee of your party, and Donald Trump was your second choice, and that you would support him if he became the nominee. Are you supporting Donald Trump for president?
Yes, I am. I will support the nominee of my party because I think he is, like I said, we don't need career politicians these days. We need a person that can get us to the next level, and we know what we're going to get with the Democrat presidential nominee, in my opinion, and we don't exactly know what we're going to get with the Republican nominee, Donald Trump, and I'm willing to take that chance.
All right, now we're going to, I hope, answer some questions from the audience. Have you got one right here? The first question will go to Harold Bratcher. And scoot right up on the microphone there, don't be shy.
Actually, Mark, this one's addressed to both.
Well, they're both, yeah, they're both going to answer, but Harold Bratcher, you answer first.
What is your opinion of the status of both Social Security and Medicare? How much longer will they be able to pay benefits at current levels? What changes need to be made?
Well, what we need to change in Social Security and Medicare, we need to come up with a comprehensive system and a tax reform that would allow our Medicare and Social Security programs to keep the money and quit letting the people in Congress borrow money against them programs to pay for other programs. We need to keep the money in-house to for the sustainability for them programs.
Congressman Yarmuth?
Well, this may be one that we can talk about for the rest of the time period. Social Security right now can pay full benefits till 2034, roughly, and then could pay, without any other changes, about 80% of projected benefits until 2075. Medicare, we've already, when we were debating the Affordable Care Act, the trustees of Medicare said the program was going to run out of money in 2017. That's now been extended till about 2030 because of the changes that were made in Medicare and the Affordable Care Act. These are going to be continuing problems, although Social Security is not as nearly as serious a problem as Medicare. One of the things that we can do, which people don't think about very often, is pass immigration reform. Because if we pass comprehensive immigration reform, we will have millions and millions of young people paying into both the Social Security Trust Fund and into the Medicare Fund and not drawing benefits for 30 or 40 years. That will be a huge first step into making both programs sustainable.
Next question.
This question is for both candidates. Tell me your philosophy on immigration, and should we build a wall?
Congressman Yarmuth?
We actually have built a wall. We've built several hundred miles of walls in the southwestern part of the country, basically near San Diego. I've been to the border. I've talked to the Border Patrol, and what their philosophy, which I adopt, is very sensible. Walls only make sense as a way to give Border Patrol agents enough time to apprehend the people who come across them. They don't stop people from coming into the country. So if you're in a very heavily populated area like Juarez, El Paso, where I was, where the border agents have at most 30 seconds to apprehend somebody before they're in the underground apparatus and disappear, you need a lot of barricades. If you're in the desert 100 miles away where the agents would have a day or two to apprehend people who came across the border because it would take them that long to walk to a place where they'd find a car or a city, then you don't need a border or wall, and it makes absolutely no sense. So I think I'll take the advice of the Border Patrol agents and say we don't need any more walls than we now have. We need to spend more on technology. But final comment: the number of people coming across the border illegally has basically been cut in half over the last during the Obama administration. So we are making progress there.
Harold?
Okay, I do agree that we need to build the wall. I think that it would stop the influx of the contraband coming into this country, not necessarily the people. I'm not necessarily worried about the people coming in. I'm worried about what they are bringing. That would be, no telling what they're bringing. They're bringing guns. Drugs is a big problem in the community, and I think we can slow some of that down if we were to complete the wall and then have some comprehensive border control patrolling the wall in maybe some areas where it's going to take longer to get to the wall. Maybe we can put some substations out there to help control or to stop the flow of them trying to get over the wall or under the wall, for that matter.
Thank you.
Can I do a follow? How would you pay for it?
How would we pay for it? It's, maybe we can start by paying for it by cut some wasteful government spending that we have. We spend a lot of money in Washington, and I'm not talking about programs. I'm just talking about what we spend in politics itself, and we can start there and, cut some of that money, and we probably have a little more money out there to do everything else that we need.
Okay, another question.
This questioner would like each of you to interpret for us the Second Amendment to the Constitution.
Harold, you go first. Mr. Bratcher?
To me, the Second Amendment is allowing me as a person to individually protect myself and my family. That's what I look at the Second Amendment. That way, the problem with the Second Amendment is, there's no problem, the problem is we cannot take the guns out of the criminals' hands. That's why we cannot take the guns out of the law-abiding citizens' hands. And that's why I support the Second Amendment, because I want to be able to protect myself until we can come up with some kind of way to take the guns out of the criminals' hands. Then I'm going to keep my gun, and I will support that.
Congressman Yarmuth?
Well, it really doesn't matter what my interpretation of the Second Amendment is. I guarantee you it is not the interpretation that the Supreme Court gave in the Heller versus the District of Columbia decision. But, and I don't believe that the Second Amendment actually did guarantee an individual right to have firearms, although, and every Supreme Court decision and every Attorney General before the Heller decision held that same thing, that there was not an individual right in the Second Amendment. What the Heller decision said, however, was that, and written by Justice Scalia, said that a man or woman is entitled to have a gun in his or her home to protect their home. That's all it guarantees. And so he said that any other restrictions or rules regarding purchase of guns or possession of guns would pass constitutional muster. So the Second Amendment, as it's now being interpreted, is very limited, and again, it's limited to the right to have a gun in your home.
Next question.
And this is for both as well. What is your stand on campaign finance reform?
Well, I've introduced a constitutional amendment to overturn the Citizens United decision, and I'm also an original co-sponsor of a bill to provide for public funding of federal campaigns. So I believe that we should severely limit the amount of money that is involved in politics. It's having a toxic effect on our government, and it's actually exacerbating the partisanship that exists in the country, because too many people have to raise money from people who will only give to those who are who guarantee that they will be a reflexive conservative or liberal, Republican or Democratic vote. So for a lot of reasons, I think we need to go to a public finance system, and we also need to get rid of the Citizens United decision. I don't think there's a possibility of a constitutional amendment, but President Clinton, I think, maybe can pass some more restrictive laws with a cooperative Congress.
Mr. Bratcher?
Oh, I totally agree. We need some campaign reform, because unfortunately, when you're a guy like me outside of politics, nobody wants to contribute to my campaign. I would love to have some public money into my campaign today. Yes, we need to set a limit for each candidate, for each district, or whether it's a metro councilman, state rep, or congressman. I would have no problem putting a limit on the amount of money that you could spend for any campaign, because it shouldn't be about the amount of money that you have in your pocket or the friends that you have that can donate to your campaign. It should be about the issues. And we have lost that way. It shouldn't always come down to the candidate that has the most money in the bank account wins the election every year. It should be a candidate that's going to be a voice for the people. And I would support any legislation that would support campaign finance reform.
Well, I've got a question for both of you then.
Okay.
Mr. Bratcher, public financing, did I hear you say you might be for some partial public financing?
Well, I was talking about, if the, like.
You'd love the money, but I mean,
Right.
would you be for it? Would you vote for it as a congressman?
I'd consider it, yes.
Okay. And Congressman Yarmuth, where would the money come from if we did have public financing?
Well, it's estimated that right now we're spending, just in congressional races, Congress, House and Senate, about $3 billion a year. That's about probably what we'll spend in the presidential campaign alone, but about $3 billion a year, and a lot of that is absurd spending. So I think we probably could get by with a couple $2 billion, at least current dollar value, and I think that is a drop in our proverbial ocean of budget, and it would buy us an awful lot of better government.
Okay. Next question.
Concern for a lot of communities in this area of the country. No matter who is elected president, how would you propose to aid out of work workers from the manufacturing sector?
Mr. Bratcher, you're first.
Okay, great question. What I would do is, what we need to focus on is repealing our trade deals or renegotiating our deals. The North American Free Trade Agreement has cost this country over 25% of our manufacturing jobs, cost over 1 million jobs. It has made wages stagnant in this country. When you have more people applying for a job, employers can pay you less. So that is what's happened today by the loopholes that our government has allowed in the NAFTA agreement, by allowing our companies to leave this country. If we can close them loopholes and help keep these jobs here, wages would go up. The unions have lost probably more jobs than anybody due to NAFTA. And that's what we need to do. We need to focus on restructuring our trade deals so that these companies may come back, may not. If we lower the taxes, that would help for them to come back so they can be competitive on a global market.
Congressman
That's how I would
Yarmuth.
do that.
Well, there are things that we can do as a country and that Congress can do to actually bring jobs back and to create more jobs, and we've got two great examples of it here in Louisville. Because of a provision that I actually introduced back in 2009, we created a low-interest loan program for companies that were going to work on energy-efficient vehicles. And because of that loan program, Ford has been able to retool the Fern Valley Road plant. There are now about 4,000 more Ford employees in the community than there were before that provision came into effect. And then at GE, also a provision I introduced to give right now you get a tax credit if you buy an energy-efficient appliance. What my provision said was that manufacturers can get that same tax credit, about 7.5%, if they manufacture that energy-efficient product in the United States. Using that provision, GE brought a line back from China, which is 400 jobs. They've also brought a line back from Mexico and one from Romania. So these are the types of initiatives that the government can do that can create jobs, good jobs, and revitalize American manufacturing.
Next question.
Well, I actually have a follow-up question here. And this is to both of you, too. Remember Ross Perot in Texas said, "This sucking sound is your job going to Mexico," regarding NAFTA. This, and I can't read this.
They all laughed at him when it happened.
They all laughed at him. They all laughed at him, but he was right. So.
So it's a question about NAFTA. Do you
NAFTA.
support
Is that
NAFTA?
true?
Do you agree with that statement that NAFTA has cost us jobs?
Well, clearly NAFTA has cost us jobs, and so has CAFTA, and actually some of the other trade deals that we've negotiated, including the South Korean deal, have not lived up to anywhere near the promises that were made. Those are some of the reasons that I've opposed TPP, because it's hard for me to look in the eyes of workers in this community and say, oh, TPP is going to be different. No, none of them have been different in terms of, now obviously there are winners and losers in any trade deal, and there are some businesses that do benefit from the trade deals, but overall, if a trade deal doesn't benefit American citizens, I'm not as worried about whether it benefits American corporations and their bottom line. So, and I know that sometimes they're related, but often they're not. And but my first priority is to make sure that we don't do anything that further damages the lot of American workers.
Mr. Bratcher, NAFTA?
Yes, I totally agree with Ross Perot's statement back then, and that's why I was a supporter of Ross Perot when he said that. And I wish he would have became our president, because I think a guy like Ross Perot that came from humble beginnings could have made great strides in this country with his vast business knowledge. And I do agree with Congressman Yarmuth. I do not support TPP either. I think that most trade deals that our government has made in this country has benefited other countries more than our own. Seems like a lot of people in government has been more concerned about making other nations more solvent than our own nation, and that's what happens with our trade deals. We need to focus on the United States of America first and foremost, and make sure that the people in this country are taken care of before we're worried about letting other countries come in and take our jobs. And I do appreciate that some of the legislation that he has, helped with Ford and General Electric, and that it was some great things in the city to help keep a lot of our people in a good job.
Next question. Again, these are coming from Louisville Forum members who have passed the questions on to the semi-moderators back here.
We have 3 or 4 questions about the Affordable Care Act, Kentucky's participation in it, possible changes, some of the reports in the media about the projected increase in affordable care premiums in the coming years. The bottom line is best summed up by this one is, what is your personal view about the future of the Affordable Care Act?
Mr. Bratcher?
Okay. I think the future of the Affordable Care Act is really on pins and needles. The problem with the ACA is the mandate. How can you put a mandate in a piece of legislation that actually costs your constituents money if they cannot afford to pay it? That's part of the problem with the ACA. The other problem is every day I open the newspaper up and I see more and more insurance companies wanting to opt out or decided not to broaden their scope on coverage with other areas. And if the insurance companies aren't wanting to cover it, then maybe we need to take a strong look at it, that maybe we need to retweak or repass that legislation to make it more affordable for the people. If we would loosen the restrictions of the insurance companies and let them sell insurance across state borders, that would help make the ACA more affordable.
Congressman Yarmuth?
Well, I think that ultimately, and I don't know what the time frame is, I'm not going to pull a Howard Schnellenberger, the only variable is time, but I think at some point we will end up with a single payer system. And We're the only country in the industrialized world that does not have a health insurance program, a national program that is organized by the government. So I think that's kind of the long-term future. I think we will transition from the Affordable Care Act to a single-payer system. In the meantime, there have been a lot of good, really good benefits from the Affordable Care Act, not to speak of the thousands and thousands of lives that have been saved. And many of them I've talked to right here in this community, like the young woman who had kidney failure, who had not had coverage, but because of the ACA, she was able to stay on her parents' insurance policy, and when she went to the hospital the second time, because she had coverage, she had not gone for a prior attack, they said that you would be dead if you weren't here. And she's alive today. So again, I think there are many improvements we could make in the ACA. Unfortunately, the Republican Congress has said, we're just going to try to repeal it, and we've now had 65 or so votes to repeal the Affordable Care Act, but not one proposal to improve it.
And what do you both think of Governor Bevin's move to shut down the Kentucky exchange and shift all those people to the federal exchange?
Well, I think Governor Bevin is looking out for the taxpayers of this country, because if at the current levels, it's going to cost the taxpayers a lot more money than this state can afford to give. What Governor Bevin is doing, there are two issues. One is involving dropping Connect and putting everybody in the federal exchange. All I can say is I asked the head of CMS in a hearing if he could think of CMS, the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, if he could think of one way Kentucky residents would be better off if they went into the federal exchange, and he said no, not one. So there's absolutely no reason for Governor Bevin to do what he's doing. Secondly, this new Medicaid waiver, which again, we probably ought to talk about at length, and I'm saying this public because it's important people realize what he's doing. He is deliberately putting forward a proposal that the federal government is obliged to reject. He knows that, his staff knows it. They were told exactly what kind of a waiver proposal would be acceptable and what wouldn't, and they deliberately put one together that will be rejected because they want to be able to blame the rejection on Obama and then rescind the entire Medicaid expansion. So we're not talking about the 86,000 people who will lose coverage under the 86,000 they've admitted. We're talking about 440,000 Kentuckians will lose health care coverage, which will be disastrous for the state, clearly disastrous for them. And remember, we're paying, he says that his plan's going to save us $2.2 billion. 1.9 of that is federal money that the state won't be getting, and the other $300 million is because of people he's cutting off from coverage. So the idea that this is some kind of financially logical or comparative is wrong.
Congressman Yarmuth went a little long. Do you want to say anything more about that? Are you good?
No, I'm good.
Okay, next question.
Trying to stick to issues here that we have some personality kind of questions we'll save for later, but trying to stick with the issue. Now this figure comes from
Some boxers are briefs.
this figure that I'm going to quote comes from whoever submitted this question. I don't know the accuracy, but the question states the federal deficit is increasing 30% in 2016. What do you propose to counter this?
Do you know if that's true? I don't know if that figure's accurate, but Congressman Yarmuth,
I
go
don't
ahead.
think that's right. The federal deficit in the current year is about between $400 and $450 billion, and that's down from $1.4 trillion in 2009. So the deficit's come down. I know it's projected to go up a little bit, but 30% would take it to roughly the $600 billion. I don't think that's accurate.
Well, even if it's not, what would you
I mean,
be
we're in the
favor?
middle. 2016 fiscal year is almost over, so I know it's not going up 30% in this year.
What can Congress do to try and bring down the federal deficit? I guess that's the question.
Well, yes, that's a great question. There are three alternatives, or a combination of the three. One is to raise taxes and generate more revenue. One is to get an economy that works, that is pumping along and generating more tax revenue without raising rates. And then the third one is to cut spending. And what the answer, the question always is, where do you cut? Right now, about 84% of the federal budget is basically mandatory automatic spending, Medicare, Medicaid, interest on the debt, Social Security. The discretionary spending is only about is about $1 trillion, discretionary including defense spending. So when you start looking at places to cut, the portions of the budget that actually are, unless you change programs like Medicare and Medicaid and Social Security, the programs that Congress actually has the authority to cut would not measurably reduce the deficit. But we've done we're spending right now at 2008 levels in the current budget. So we actually have done a fair amount of cutting spending, but we've done nothing to raise revenue.
Do you think they should?
I think we should.
Okay. Harold Bratcher, you got a couple minutes, actually, because,
Give me the question again.
okay, the question was, how do you cut the federal deficit?
How would I cut the federal deficit? The first thing that I think we should do is balance a budget. Once you balance a budget, then you can start looking at programs that might not need as much money as that's allocated today. That's where I would start. We haven't had a balanced budget, I think, decades now. But I would start with balancing the budget, looking at a lot of the programs that we have, seeing where the wasteful spending is in Washington, and then by that we can reduce our debt. We don't need to raise taxes. I think if we actually cut taxes, that would give people more of their money back in their pocket where they can in turn spend back into the communities and in the nation, and would actually give more money back to Congress in extra taxes from the extra money that they have spent.
So you agree with trickle-down, what
Yes.
we call trickle-down economics?
Yes, trickle it down.
Okay. All right, next question.
These are actually two questions. Let me start with one. What will you do to stop the flow of heroin that's affecting our families and healthcare dollars?
Mr. Bratcher?
Oh, that's why I talk about finishing building the wall. Because every day, most of the drugs in this country come from the South. And if we have open borders, they can sit and bring it in every day. So if we could come up with a comprehensive border control that works, whether it be a fence, a wall, or if you just want to man it with people. But we have to start at the border and to protect that first, to keep the flow of the drugs coming in from Mexico.
Congressman Yarmuth?
Well, we're spending somewhere in the neighborhood of $20 billion a year on the war on drugs and trying to interdict drugs very ineffectively, and it's been ineffective for a long time. I think one thing we have to do is spend, and we just passed a bill in Congress that set up some relatively important new policies on opioid use, and I think that's a good first step. We didn't appropriate any money to implement them, but we passed good policy. But ultimately, we've got to have a whole new attitude about drugs and how we treat them in society. We have to reform our criminal justice system. I've had the privilege of going to a veterans treatment court last night and saw what a different approach to handling addiction can do, and these men who are veterans are getting back on their feet. So it's a very, very large problem, but the wall, again, is going to be about as effective as what we've been doing for the last 30, 40 years. In other words, it's not going to be effective.
Okay,
All right.
Congressman, can I ask a
Well,
question?
actually, that's where I was going next.
Okay.
We have, in the middle of the program, we allow the candidates, as we said, to ask a question of each other. It is your turn to ask Congressman
Is
Yarmuth a
this my
question.
first question or second question?
This is your question as part of the rules. How about that?
Okay, because I never got my first question.
So this is your first.
Okay.
This is your first question. You each get one.
No, I thought we was getting two. Okay, no, it's fine.
Okay.
Congressman, 2 years ago, you answered a question on this very stage. The charge was issued that you had acted inappropriately by helping write the ACA while your family business and much of your personal wealth are tied to home health. And you told this audience that the Ethics Board had cleared you to vote on the measure, not craft it. Your family's company had lost value since the ACA's passage, so you had clearly voted against your own interest, your words. Since the ACA has been fully implemented, and as expected, Almost Family has grown from a $200 million company in 2014 to a $409 million company today. My question is to you, how will your story change this time now that the facts are made clear of the ACA?
Well,
and your stance with the ACA?
first of all, what's documentable is that under the ACA for the last several years, particularly during the time period you mentioned, over the last 2 years, reimbursement from the government to home health care companies, along with most other providers, has declined. So there is absolutely no benefit there has been no benefit from the law to Almost Family, to home health care companies, to hospice companies, to virtually everybody but drug companies and medical equipment manufacturers. What has happened is my brother's been a really good CEO.
Okay.
And they've expanded. They've done a lot of acquisitions. They've built the company mostly by acquisition, but they've figured out how to manage home health care in a very effective way when a lot of other companies haven't. But again, the ACA and the reimbursement schedule has actually still worked to their disadvantage over the last 2 years.
So none of your...
I will stand corrected. They each do get 2 questions. So Harold Bratcher will consider this make this your second question. Okay.
Okay. All right, Congressman. Not only has their stock performance level in 05, if you would have invested $10,000 in that company in 05, that same investment would be worth $250,000 today in 2016. It has outperformed Humana, the Dow, NASDAQ, and a lot of other healthcare companies. And you are going to sit here and tell us that none of the laws that you passed directly or indirectly affected any of that?
No, actually, they did directly affect
Their bottom line, their
yeah,
profit.
negatively.
Okay, well, I don't see how it's negatively when now they are worth double in the last 2 years. They have doubled their net worth in 2 years. So I don't see how that's
Well, they
a
haven't doubled
negative.
they've doubled their market value. in
Right,
2
their
years.
market value, not their net worth. I'm sorry,
Right.
market value.
Yeah.
You're right. But actually,
And I've owned stock in the company since
I know.
1979.
no,
So I've been invested in the company. The stock has gone up and has gone down, and it's been higher than it is now, and it's been a lot lower.
right. It just over the 10-year, it just don't look like the ethics board should have ever allowed you to pass legislation, vote on it, or even write legislation that affected the healthcare industry, in my opinion, and a lot of opinion in this district.
All right. Let him answer. Final word, and then we'll end this debate.
Okay.
No, well,
Okay.
No.
the
Go ahead,
ethic,
answer
the
the
ethic, well, the ethics rules are that you do not, and you actually have an obligation to vote, if the legislation before you affects a broad class of individuals, corporations, or so forth. So, in other words, unless the legislation specifically affected Almost Family and not all home health care companies and not all health care providers, according to the ethics rules of the House, I have an obligation to vote on that measure.
Okay.
All right, Congressman Yarmuth, second question.
Mr. Bratcher, in your answers on the Vote Smart questionnaire, you talked about that there were a lot of questions about taxes you would raise, decrease, or maintain. And you basically said you would either somewhat decrease or greatly decrease virtually every tax except for the excise tax on transportation fuel, which you said you would slightly decrease. On the other side, on spending, you said you wanted to greatly maintain spending on most everything, greatly increase spending on defense, and the only thing you wanted to decrease spending on was welfare. How do those numbers add up? If you want to decrease or greatly decrease virtually every tax and eliminate the estate tax, but you also want to greatly increase one of our biggest categories of spending.
Okay, if we were to come together and repeal a lot of our trade agreements and bring jobs back, then we wouldn't need the welfare program. We don't need people to live on entitlements. We need to get them out there and train them how to become viable members of this society, job training, extend their or help them with education where they can get a GED. That's what we need to do. We need to quit focusing on entitlements and letting them just live off of it forever. There has to come a day to where the people have to be able to support themselves. That's why I would decrease the welfare spending.
Okay. We've got time for one more question. Have you got one more good one? If not, I've got a couple. But go ahead.
One quick one that
Okay.
a lot of people talk about, and that is, given the current political climate in which we live, what can be done to address the thousands of firearm-related deaths in America today?
Congressman Yarmuth, you go first.
Well, as you probably know, a few weeks ago, I was engaged in a sit-in on the House floor, and what we were trying to do there was to force the leadership of the House to have a couple of simple votes. One was to pass or to vote on the no-fly, no-buy legislation, which means if you're on a terrorist watch list, and which is also the no-fly list, that you shouldn't be able to buy a gun. We also want to vote on expanding background checks to include gun shows and online sales. Over the past 10 years, more than 2 million gun purchases have attempted gun purchases to convicted felons have been blocked because of universal background check, because of the background checks that are in place. So we can stop an awful lot of gun violence and keep guns away from lots of criminals if we were to expand those background checks to include online sales and gun show sales, which constitute about half of all the guns sold in the United States right now. So those are the first steps I would take.
Mr. Bratcher?
Can you please repeat the question?
What can be done to, given the current political climate, what should we do, what can we do to reduce the thousands of gun-related deaths in America today?
Well, I think we start by having people take gun safety classes. There's nothing wrong with somebody that wants to own a gun to get familiar with that firearm, because it can be a dangerous thing in the hands of the wrong people. The political climate in this country always likes to go to the Second Amendment because it's a political issue for both parties to take a stance on. But if I totally agree with Congressman, we need extended background checks. The problem with putting people, not allowing people on the no-fly list to buy a firearm, it's because some people can get put on that list and you don't know how to get taken off of it. I have no problem supporting legislation of that nature, but if you cannot go somewhere to say, why am I on this list? Please take me off of it. I shouldn't be on it in the first place. You cannot support that type of legislation when you cannot get off of a list once you're on it.
Okay, good answers. Now, here we go with the closing statement. Mr. Bratcher, you're first. 2 minutes.
Again, I'd like to thank the Louisville Forum for allowing me to be a part of this today. I believe we are at a turning point in our politics. The American people are tired of feeling that the political class has opportunities we don't have and plays by their own set of rules. We don't begrudge Congressman's wealth, or anyone's wealth for that matter, but we do take issue with the appearance that politicians like John Yarmuth are taking advantage of their role as a public servant and enriching themselves while real wages stagnate and underemployment and labor participation remain at record levels. Questionable investments, shady land deals, clear conflicts of interest hiding behind a very public released annually to the press salary donation, and a less public tax write-off are just a few of the reasons Mr. Yarmuth should not be our representative. But enough of that guy. In the end, this is about you, the people. If you want a representative that will listen, a representative that will fight for our Constitution and stand up to any and all the corruption in Washington, who will wake up every day working to better serve you and your needs, to set fair standards for everyone, no matter their place in society, and to fulfill the promise of the opportunity that America represents to the rest of the world, vote for me, Harold Bratcher. I humbly ask you for your support, and thank you for allowing me to be a part of this today. And I'd also like to thank Congressman Yarmuth.
Well, thanks again for this discussion, Mr. Bratcher and Mark. Somewhat blindsided by ad hominem attacks, which I don't even have any idea what you're talking about. But
Okay.
anybody's welcome to talk to my banker and find out exactly how much I've enriched myself over the last 10 years. This job has cost me a lot more than I haven't made anything from it, as you know.
Yeah, we know, because you like the press releases.
But this job has been incredibly rewarding in many ways. And while I am frustrated by what goes on in Washington, as I know many of you are, the things that we've been able to do in this community for the citizens have been incredibly important. We've been able to bring back more than $6 million in federal benefits that were owed to our citizens. They were having trouble getting. Again, we've been able to save lives by intervening in certain cases. In one case, to get emergency surgery approved. That was a Medicaid case for a man who was in a medically induced coma, waiting for a liver to be transplanted. He's still alive today. The things that we do on a daily basis to reach out to the community, to engage the community, to make every citizen of this community feel that they have a connection to their government, those are the things that make this job incredibly rewarding. And those are the reasons that I would like to continue for 2 more years. It's been an honor to represent my hometown, the 3rd District of Kentucky, and I firmly believe that I have plenty more to contribute in the next Congress, including possibly being the ranking member on the Budget Committee. We haven't talked about that yet. But anyway, thank you all for your engagement and your participation, and I look forward to the next few months of the campaign, and I would appreciate your support.
On behalf of the Louisville Forum, I would like to thank Congressman Yarmuth and Mr. Bratcher for your participation today, and to Mark Hebert for moderating, and also thank our questioners, Ed Schatt and Tanya Eichenboom, and our timekeeper, Jeff Barr. So we thank you for participating today. And as an expression of our appreciation, we have for you all a Louisville Forum Mint Julep Cup for our participators and our moderator. Our next meeting will be held on Wednesday, September 14th, and reservations can be made online at louisvilleforum.org or by calling our voicemail at 329-0111. Thanks and have a wonderful day.